And we are back with another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show. I am rolling solo today, but I have a ton I want to talk about. I want to get into this quickly. If you are listening live as people are filtering in here, hit the share button on the show. Get this out there to a few more listeners. Head on over to the YouTube channel, subscribe. That always helps us out. Leave a comment. And let us know what you think of the show, ideas for future guests, topics you want me to cover. Let's jump right into it. Got three big topics today: Israel and Charlie Kirk. Israel, the weapon state, and will the U.S. invade Venezuela? So I want to start off here talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination, because one of the major, if not the just kind of biggest discussion around Charlie Kirk right now is around the state of Israel. And I think there's two issues here that are getting conflated, and it's really unhelpful. The first is the idea that Israel assassinated Charlie Kirk. I see no evidence for this. I don't think this would make any sense at all. Even if Charlie wasn't a full-on Zionist, a full-on Ben Shapiro type, certainly he was a supporter of Donald Trump, a promoter of Donald Trump. A lot of Republicans who are Zionists themselves. And even if his viewpoint was shifting, it certainly, he wasn't Candace Owens. He wasn't out there calling for the US to stop funding Israel, calling for the Israel to end the genocide in Gaza, or anything like that. And so I think it's really important to understand that there isn't even circumstantial evidence that Israel wanted to assassinate Charlie Kirk. And I think this is a real mistake to go down this road. Now, I think a big part of this is the fault of Netanyahu and Israel, in that they have made themselves such monsters that there has been no limits on what they're willing to do. This week, I'm reading a story in Haaretz, an Israeli sniper who says he fired 50 to 60 shots a day. Was ordered by his commander to shoot Palestinians as they tried to approach the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the aid distribution site, including children. And so a state where you have a sniper putting their crosshairs on a child and their officer demanding that he fire is capable of anything. And so in that way, I understand where people are just willing to believe any awful thing about Israel. But again, there has to be some evidence for it. The next thing, I think, is the kind of increase in anti-Semitism, largely because of all the attacks that they have made on people who are making good faith critiques of Israel. And they've created more anti-Semitism in the US as they've tried to crack down again on people trying to make good faith critiques of what Israel is doing in Gaza. And so those two factors combined have led people to make and believe this claim that Israel had something to do with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I see no evidence for that. Now, that is not to say just accept the official narrative. Just believe whatever the government says about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I'm not the person to get into the details on that. I think there's some people who have done some pretty good deep dives and raise some very relevant questions as to about the shooter, if he acted alone, that the official story doesn't quite line up. It's fine to ask those questions, but to point the finger at an actor where it really doesn't make sense is quite baffling. And look, if a foreign actor took out Charlie Kirk, I don't know why people weren't pointing their finger at the Ukrainian Nazis or the Mexican cartels first, because at least there, Charlie Kirk has openly and publicly, stood against funding the war in Ukraine, closing the border, shutting down the drug trafficking. So you could at least understand that he's been publicly outspoken on those issues. But Israel, it's just absolutely not the case. And that's just wild and pointless speculation as well. I'm just saying, even if you want to point to a foreign actor, I don't even think Israel should lead your list of possible suspects. Now, where I think there is relevant debate when it comes to Charlie Kirk is on his legacy and what was his stance on Israel. And I think this again is the fault of Netanyahu, because after Charlie Kirk died, he came out and made a statement about how there's never been such a good friend to Israel as Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk loved Israel, and then he's doubled down on that. So I want to play this first clip. This is Netanyahu discussing the Charlie Kirk assassination.
Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, said that the bigger the lie, the faster it will spread. Well, somebody has fabricated a monstrous big lie that Israel had something to do with Charlie Kirk's horrific murder. This is insane. It is false. It is outrageous. Charlie loved Israel. He loved the Jewish people. He told me so in a letter that he sent me just a few months ago. He encouraged me to make the case directly to the American people about how vital Israel is to U.S. national security. Now, if Charlie disagreed with a policy of mine or a decision here and there, not only did I not mind, I welcomed it. This is the essence of Charlie. This is the essence of a free country. It's exactly what Charlie stood for. And I knew that his suggestions always came from the heart. Now some are peddling these disgusting rumors, perhaps out of obsession, perhaps with Qatari funding.
So you almost wonder if Netanyahu is trying to further the rumors by lying about the Charlie Kirk assassin, or saying Israel's not involved in the Charlie Kirk assassination, with the exact same rhetoric he uses to lie about so many other issues when it comes to Gaza. But what I really want to focus on in that statement is I do believe, and it does seem to me, that Netanyahu is trying to hijack Charlie Kirk's legacy and make him out to be more pro-Israel than he was. And that is a really disgusting thing to do, to try to manipulate a man after he's died to meet your own political objectives. Now, I'm sure people could come up with hundreds of examples in politics. It's a disgusting business where people have done this, but we should point out here that it does seem that Netanyahu is wrong. Now, there's kind of a multitude of evidence coming out about this. I think both Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, who are close to Charlie Kirk, have made some, compelling statements about their private conversations with Charlie Kirk, not saying that he wasn't a Zionist, not saying that he had shifted and was going to be, wearing a free Palestine shirt at his next event or anything like that, but that he was questioning the narrative. And I do think, in his public statements, you've seen some of this seeping out a little bit. And so I do think that is important to talk about. Dave Smith today on his show, Part of the Problem, former guest of this program, was discussing, his recent conversations with Charlie Kirk, and how after Dave debated Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan about Israel's genocide in Gaza, that Charlie reached out to Dave through text message and said, "I largely agree with you on what you said during that debate," and that Dave would be surprised about how much him and Charlie agree on that issue. Now, look, maybe somebody says, Charlie's a nice guy. He believes in, talking with people. And so he often takes, as much of a monster as a lot of the, left half of America has presented him over recent years, but particularly since his death. He really does. If you watch his events, he does seem to sincerely try to engage with people and not to just be mean, right? He's not doing a roast up there where every pink-haired trans man that comes up, he's just trying to make dids on them and things. He's asking genuine questions. So maybe he's just trying to strike a conciliatory tone towards Dave in order to have a discussion with Dave, and that's the way he approaches things. But also you could look at, he even had a major debate at his event between Dave and Josh Hammer on this issue. And so look, I don't think, and I think it's pretty clear that Ben Shapiro and the crew over at the Daily Wire would never welcome Dave Smith like Charlie Kirk did to one of their events. And so certainly there is, a range of how much people support Israel, and there's a deep support for Israel in the MAGA movement. But I do think there's a fundamental conflict between MAGA and being a Zionist and a supporter of Israel to the extent the U.S. government is. And this seemed to really come to a head over the summer, where in June, Israel started bombing Iran. And with new discussions just revealed this week by Israeli media, senior Israeli officials knew the second they started that war that they needed America to come in and to bomb Fordo, or else they wouldn't be able to enter the conflict. And essentially understood that Israeli citizens would continue to get bombed, right? This is the Israeli government's thinking. They know that if they start a war with Iran, Iran will fire back. eventually start to hit Israelis. And then that's just going to increase pressure on Trump to enter into the conflict. So they understand the dynamics here. They understand that Trump is going to get us into this war. But Charlie Kirk, I think, is a true believer in MAGA, Make America Great Again, and particularly America first. This idea that, we need to be putting our country above all others, including the state of Israel. And so all conflict here between the U.S. and the Israeli interests. Now, that doesn't mean that Charlie Kirk wanted to cut off the U.S. aid for Israel, just that he didn't want the U.S. to get directly involved into that conflict. And, maybe once he realizes that there's a divide between the U.S. and Israel on this issue, maybe that, thought continues to grow in his head. But he did recognize that divide. And I do think that's important. And so I do want to play a clip of Charlie Kirk. This is from him of October 2023, questioning Israel.
So I've been to Israel many times. The whole country's a fortress. When I first heard this story, I still had the same gut instinct that I did initially. I find this very hard to believe. I've been to that Gaza border. You cannot go 10 feet without running into a 19-year-old with an AR-15 or an automatic machine gun that's an IDF soldier. Right? The whole country is surveilled. I think some questions need to be asked. Was there a stand-down order? Was there a stand-down order? They're live streaming the killing of Jews. Did somebody in the government say stand down? That is a legitimate, non-conspiracy question. The whole country is the IDF. The whole country is.
Yeah.
The essence is this. This is the closest thing to the Holocaust that any of us have lived through. But the fact is now Bibi and the Israeli hard-right government has a mandate. I got to be careful the way I say this. They're going to try to ethnically cleanse Gaza.
Yep.
I mean, I don't use that term lightly, okay? They're talking about basically removing 2.5 million people from there, okay? There are some serious questions here, Patrick. And let me tell you, my pattern recognition over the last 5 years has become pretty sharp. COVID, Maui fires, Epstein. When I see a story and it doesn't click, our guts are usually right.
So the reason I want to play this clip is just to make it clear again that Charlie Kirk was willing to look at Israel in a way that the really hardcore Zionists, the Mike Huckabees, the Ben Shapiros look at Israel. They would never say anything like this. They would never say Israel is going to conduct an ethnic cleansing. They would never question whether Israel gave stand-down orders on October 7th. And by the way, I don't agree with Charlie on that. I don't think there was a stand-down order. I understand why somebody would think that, given how Israel has exploited that event to conduct an ethnic cleansing in Gaza, to move forward with the annexation of the West Bank, to take parts of southern Lebanon and southern Syria. I mean, hell, just this week, Israel is negotiating with the Syrian government where they want to have a deal with Damascus that they could use Syrian airspace when they want to strike Iran. Right? What Israel has done in the wake of October 7th in the Middle East is absolutely astounding. I mean, belligerent warmongering all over the place. They have now bombed in, I believe, 8 or 9 countries since October 7th, including U.S. allies like Qatar, starting wars with Iran. And so this is way, way out over the top. And again, I just really want to highlight here that there does seem to be a difference between a Charlie Kirk who would question Israel and Ben Shapiro, a full-on Israeli apologist. Again, doesn't mean he's not a useful tool of the Israeli lobby in the United States over the past 23 months as the war in Gaza is unfolding. I mean, he is still supporting Israel, right? During this time, he is not renouncing Zionism or moving away from it publicly, but you do have to understand the nuance of his position here. And so I have one more clip of Charlie Kirk that I want to play, and I think this one is important because it happens after an event that happened in the Hamptons. There's a lot of somewhat mixed reporting on this. I think it's clear that this event did happen, that Charlie Kirk was at least in part responsible for putting on this event, although it does seem like Bill Ackman had a role in it. He's tried to downplay, but does seem he has a role in putting on this event. Him and Charlie Kirk kind of do it together. They invite some higher, well-known figures in the or conservative movement together, and they discuss some topics. And depending on who you ask, I guess it seems that between a debate and a confrontation between Charlie and some of the other attendees break out over the situation in Israel. And then this is what he says either the next day or just a few days later to Megyn Kelly. So let's play this clip.
Megyn, you're hitting on something very potent and important. The people that are attacking me are in a hyper paranoid state because they're at war, and war tends to make things black and white, and you're a hammer looking for a nail. I have less ability sometimes online to criticize the Israeli government without backlash than actual Israelis do. Personality types like you, myself, and Tucker, the more that you guys privately and publicly call our character into question, when the hostile reaction is that now Megyn and Charlie are enemies,
right?
Boy, I'll tell you, like you're not gonna, I wouldn't say lose, but you will weaken and just basically deflate two of your strongest advocates if that continues.
So once again, I really just think this drives the nail home that Charlie was like his top priority. I don't think was Israel. I think his top priority was American domestic issues, protecting the fundamental values he saw of, I guess, Christian American nation. And, just to kind of wrap this all up here, I think just as badly as Netanyahu is trying to exploit the death of Donald Trump, or of Charlie Kirk, Donald Trump and his administration are doing the same thing. Charlie Kirk was a hardcore free speech advocate. He did not believe that there was a difference between free speech and hate speech. He didn't believe in crackdowns on speech. And certainly in the wake of his assassination, the Trump administration seems to be preparing to crack down on free speech. I mean, you had Jimmy Kimmel making a joke, and really the joke wasn't even at Charlie Kirk's expense. It was at Trump's offense. And the FCC chair made a threat to the network, and he's been at least temporarily shut down. And so there's a real crackdown on free speech in Charlie Kirk's name that I think if you look at Charlie's very public history, where on Israel you got a little bit more behind the scenes, he is very outspoken on free speech and very committed to it. And so there's a lot of attempts to steal Charlie's legacy. And I'm sure in the coming days, we're going to see real efforts to kind of, steal his show, his audience, his very prominent and powerful organization, Turning Points USA. And, we'll kind of see where whose hands that all winds up in. But I'm sure that's a part of this whole idea to steal his legacy as well. Now, before I move on to the next subject, I do want to mention the sponsor of today's episode, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2025. This is an online event put on every year by Mikhail Thorup, the host of the Expat Money Show. And what Mikhail does is he assembles a great group of experts who could teach you how to live abroad, how to move your businesses abroad, buy property abroad, get a second passport. Look, if you ever decide that you need to get out of the United States for any reason, whether it's just financially or because the coming censorship crackdown that we really seem to have on the horizon, with all that, you might want to get this information that they're putting out, the Expat Money Summit 2025. So anybody could get a free event at Expat, get a free ticket to the event at expatmoneysummit.com. However, if you want a VIP ticket, which includes being able to rewatch the different experts that Mikhail puts together, or if you want special access to some of the VIP panels, I'm going to be on one of those panels alongside frequent guests of this show, my colleague at antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp. So if you want to get on that panel, get a VIP ticket. The website is expatmoneysummit.com, and you save on your VIP ticket with the promo code Kyle. All right, next up here, I want to talk about Israel, the weapon state, and this is a recent statement from Benjamin Netanyahu.
Get on board now, because we're about to take off. We're about to take off with the technologies of the future. You've got a glimpse of it in the amazing possibilities and the amazing achievement of Israel in the 12-day war with Iran. We're talking about the technologies of the future that are here today and are being developed in Israel. The one area that I spoke about yesterday was the weapons industry. There's a race now for weapons in the world, but it is not a market race. Because unlike everything else that we could talk about, that's controlled by governments. And their calculations can sometimes be political, not necessarily economic. And therefore, what we are going to do is to build an arms industry that will match the best arms industries in the world with one proviso. We want to produce first for ourselves on a much larger scale and with unimaginable innovation. So we are going to produce an independent arms industry, very powerful, very strong, that can withstand any kind of international political constraints and will provide security for the state of Israel. This is what I envision for the state. Get on board, because we're about to take off to a new stage of prosperity.
So this is absolute insanity here, and for a number of reasons. The first off is, he's bragging about all these weapons. They're testing them in their genocide in Gaza, right? They're quadcopter drones they have flying around, small drones the size of a couple basketballs. They have guns on them, just flying around executing people, little drones carrying hand grenades, falling on people, executing them, blowing them up that way. They've developed these, what they call suicide APCs, which is basically just a car bomb, right? This is actually what ISIS was doing during their offensives, their blitzkriegs in Iraq and Syria back, I guess that would be about 2010, 2011, is they would load up some of the armored personnel carriers that they had seized from fallen Iraqi army bases, American APCs, and they would put, a terrorist, an ISIS member in the front seat and have them drive to the target. Israel uses a robot, but it's the same concept. They load them up with explosives. They drive them where they want in Gaza and they blow them up. All kinds of just sit technologies. They figured out that if they drop multiple bunker busting, the 2,000-pound bombs in the same locations, it creates a toxic gas that pulls oxygen out of the air and suffocates people to death below ground. There's good evidence that Israeli captives, hostages have been killed this way. And so these weapons that Netanyahu is talking about are paid for, are built on the blood and the genocide in Gaza. It's unbelievable that he would be able to stand up there in front of this nice screen in this well-produced conflict and talk about how the world needs to get on board. We are all disgusted and appalled with what Israel is doing in Gaza, and the idea, and he's probably right, that many of our governments are going to go out and they're going to buy these weapons. Now, I think there's another really important part to what Netanyahu is saying here, and that the weapons are made for Israel first. And the reason why that's important is because one of the things Israel is right now is reliant on the U.S. for military support. Israeli generals, former leaders have admitted this since October 7th, that if America withdrew support, Israel could not do what it's doing in Gaza. They require the American assistance to keep the war going. And so again, what Netanyahu was talking about is having more of a self-sustaining military. I think understanding that there's a clock, that there's only so long that the U.S. is going to give Israel the unconditional support. In part, it's because of the generational chip that I'm sure Charlie Kirk's more moderate views, again compared to some Zionists on Israel, what was probably a reflection of his younger base being at least half against the war in Gaza, what Israel is doing in Gaza, continuing to fund Israel to the level the United States is. So if Israel understands that, then they need to build an independent weapons industry if they want to be able to maintain the greater Israel that they create. And so I think this is an important part of all of this. Now, the last thing to point out here is that he's saying Israel an awful lot, but this is an American arms industry built in Israel. This is not an Israeli funded and created arms industry. This is the U.S. pouring tens of billions of dollars into Israel to allow this to happen. Israel does not have an independent military. They are a client state of the United States. Now, there's this weird inverse colonial relationship right now where as Israel has become a colony of the U.S., it is effectively been able to get a lot of influence in Washington to affect a blank check to do whatever they want in their region of the world. That's an astounding amount of power that we have given the Israelis. But again, this is a US funded and built weapons industry that he is talking about. And I think that the American firsters, the Trump movement, should be very concerned about this. I mean, as time moves on, the main US export is becoming more and more and more the arms that we sell around the world. If we build Israel a military industrial complex that rivals our own, they're going to take business away from us. Why do the American firsters not care that we are literally funding one of our main an opposition, another company, another country to produce weapons that will compete with our own military industrial complex again, which is becoming a growing and growing part of the American economy. So this, I think, should be really concerning on a number of levels. The first, they celebrating the genocide, that if Israel does have more of an independent military, then they're going to be able to probably be even more ruthless in their wars and how far they're willing to expand their borders, but also just that we're buying this for them. And then, of course, they're going to use it. Last up here, I did want to talk about this before the weekend. Venezuela, a lot happening there, and Trump was asked if he's going to invade.
President Maduro in Venezuela says that you're getting ready to invade his country. What is his message to him?
Well, I would say this right away. Stop sending Tren de Aragua into the United States. Stop sending drugs into the United States. We knocked off actually 3 boats, not 2, but you saw 2. And the problem is there are very few boats out in the water. There are not a lot of boats out on the water. I can't imagine why. Not even fishing boats. There's nobody. Nobody wants to go take a fish.
So this is, I think, really important on a number of levels. The first, if you watch Trump's body language there, I don't know. I think he's being cagey. Now, he's saying that, Maduro is sending TDA into the United States. His own intelligence agency has said this isn't true, that Maduro is unlikely to be controlling TDA, to have any real influence over the cartel. It is a gang that does exist in Venezuela. It's unsurprising. Gangs form in a lot of countries that are heavily targeted by U.S. sanctions, in part because it's very difficult to legally obtain goods on the international market. And so this empowers people who are willing to work outside of the legal system to import things, and it empowers cartels. Now, that again doesn't mean Maduro has anything to do with it, or the other cartel they claim he's a leader of, Cartel de los Soles. There's little evidence that that's even a real organization. It's just this fictional network that the U.S. has. There's different criminals in the Venezuelan government. Again, common result of sanctions. Whenever a country is heavily sanctioned, one of the ways the government is able to not only keep people loyal to make sure they keep making money, so they're invested in the government, is to allow them to have a little criminal enterprise on the side where they're making money that the government can't provide because they're starved for cash, but also it gives the government an excuse to arrest that person at any time. They're guilty of actual crimes. The government knows it and is looking the other way. But if that person ever gets too unfriendly or too inconvenient, you have an easy reason to arrest them. And so they're able to pick out some people, mid-level people in the Venezuelan government who are criminals, and they're able to say, this is a cartel that Maduro is the leader of. It simply doesn't exist. Trump is making up the pretense. Now, you would think it's important that his own intelligence community has said that TDA is not controlled by Maduro, but we saw this with Iran. When his own intelligence community said Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon, Trump bombed Iranian nuclear facilities anyways. Now, the next thing he talks about here is blowing up 3 ships in Venezuelan waters. This is important because previously they had only disclosed that there were 2. But the next part of this, I think, is really important as well. He's saying there's not even fishing ships out in those waters. This would really indicate to me that at least 1, probably 2, if not all 3 of the ships that the U.S. has blown up off the coast of Venezuela have been fishing vessels and not vessels associated with TDA. one of the reasons there's good reason to believe the first vessel was a fishing ship and not involved with TDA is the number of people that were on board. Typically, smuggling operations, you want less people involved because you're doing something criminal and you want to, remain hidden. If you're traveling all the way from Venezuela to the US with 11 people, you need far more supplies than if you're going from Venezuela to the US with 2 or 1 person. So, and also, fishing ships are heavy labor, so you need more people on the vessel to carry out those operations. So if these again were all drug boats, then why would the fishing ships be so afraid of sailing and going about and obviously doing the business that keeps about their livelihoods, right? I'm sure they're just not lazy and sitting at home and thinking, oh, a nice few days off because the US has fired some missiles in the area. No, they're afraid to go because they know that other of those ships that have been blown up by the US have been fishing vessels and not drug smuggling operations. I'm very concerned this is going to continue to escalate. I don't think we necessarily have a ground invasion of Venezuela on the horizon. But if the U.S. does try to overthrow Maduro, even through offshore operations, I think they're going to find it very difficult. It's a country with a lot of remote terrain. Maduro is very popular among particularly the lower class of Venezuela. He has millions of militiamen with arms. And so to actually take out Maduro would be, I think, a very dangerous and very difficult operation that would eventually involve U.S. troops there. And so I think we're going to continue to see the ratchet up here of U.S. intervention. And I believe the next step will be U.S. strikes inside of Venezuela, which could happen in the coming weeks. I know the reports over the summer, I think Ken Klippenstein did one. There was another one from the Financial Times that both said mid-September is when Trump wanted the Pentagon or the Department of War now, we should say, to be ready to carry out strikes and operations inside of Venezuela. So it could come at any time at this point. All right, everybody, that will do it for the show today. Before you log off here, share the show. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and recommend it to some other people. Help us grow this channel. I want to have on bigger and bigger guests on the show. And of course, the more subscribers we have, the easier it is to convince these people to come on. So help out the show to grow and check out the Expat Money Summit, expatmoneysummit.com. Thanks, everyone.